Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. Welcome back. We're continuing where we left off in writing the offer. So last week we finished talking about sale of buyer's property, that contingency of sale of a buyer's property, and using the COP. We didn't go into the COP in detail. That will be a separate class. We'll do that with contingent sales later on down the line. But that's where we stopped. So we're going to now move into some of the timelines for possession and how we handle seller occupied units, things like that. So unless anybody has any questions, then I will share and we can be off and running. If you do have questions, remember, just raise your hand or type them in the chat and I'll get to you as soon as I can there. Let's see. You should be looking at right now. You should be looking at the RPA and you should be looking at paragraph 3M should be there. That's where we are since we finished the COP. So we're going to be here. So we're going to start talking about the possession of the property. So time of possession is when the property is recorded and provided. The buyer becomes the owner, right? So by default in this contract, it's upon notice of recordation. There's no need to change that. They're the owner at that point. Usually there's no change to that. We just leave that alone for when it is going to be delivered to the buyer. Now, if there's any seller occupied units, we're not talking about tenants yet, but seller occupied units, and this is a question that you should be asking. We're talking about strength of offer. If I'm buyer's agent, if there's a seller living in the property, number one, I should assume they're going to need some time after close of escrow to move out. I should make that assumption and make my offer a little bit more appealing because it is something that is going to be necessary. Even listing agents make the mistake of not giving their sellers time after close of escrow. A seller will say to a listing agent, "Oh no, we're going to be out. We're going to be out in, before the close of escrow." And then inevitably something happens and they have to remain thereafter. So we're not even talking about a contingent sale here. We're talking about just a normal seller is leaving. They have another house somewhere else, whatever the case may be. At the very least, there should be a 3 days after close of escrow clause here when we're looking at this. At the very least, on a seller occupied unit, we should have 3 days after close of escrow. Now, by checking that, you can see that what popped up in my forms is a seller licensed to remain in possession. Okay? That needs to be included anytime there is a seller remaining in possession of the property. What happened to it jumped all the way down. Anytime that the seller is going to remain in possession for any time between 1 day and 29 days, right? So 29 days or fewer, and we're going to be using the SIP form right here. Anything over 29 days, so 30 days or more, we're going to be using the form RLAS. So for example, this seller needed to rent back for 45 days. Now added into my forms is the residential lease after sale. So when I check those boxes, it's going to add those things automatically. I don't know why it keeps jumping all the way down to the bottom. But know which form is which and what needs to be there. So part of the communication that I have with a listing agent, again, we're talking about writing strong, clean offers here. Does the seller need any time after close of escrow? Now, the listing agent may say, yeah, they need a couple days. They need this. They need whatever. No, they're going to be out the close of escrow. Even if a listing agent tells me they're going to be out at the close of escrow, I'm going to give them the 3 days. common practice, seller is in there. I want to make sure that my buyer is not expecting to move in the minute it records, because generally there's a delay. So I'm going to do that no matter what. But if I talk to the listing agent and find out, hey, how much time does your seller need? Then I can write my offer the way they say. So, oh, they need, 2 weeks. Perfect. Now I can put the 2 weeks in. I can put the SIP in, fill out the SIP properly, send the whole thing in. Stronger, cleaner offer, less need for a counter offer, because now the listing agent doesn't have to tell me, hey, by the way, they need 14 days. Now, if this seller is contingent on finding a replacement property, at a bare minimum, I'm probably going to give them 10 days just off the rip, right? Like, I write the offer, it's contingent, I'm giving you 10 days. The reason for that is because when we close escrow, then they're going to transfer their money, right? They're going to send their money to the escrow for their upleg for the property they're purchasing. They're going to sign loan docs. They're going to do all that stuff. So there's a delay there anyway, probably of about 4 or 5 days. But then that seller may need some time to remain in possession. So the sellers, it's like a domino effect, right? It's coming downhill. It's longer and longer time. So at a very minimum, I'm going to allow 10 days in there. I'm going to give them the 10. I might push it to 14 even if they don't need it. Again, I'm giving strength of offer. What I'm trying to do is make my offer look more appealing to the seller, because now, especially if there's a good listing agent on that purchase that I'm writing the offer on that listing, they're going to look at it and go, yeah, this buyer is going to be prepared that there's going to be a delay between us closing escrow and you being able to move into your new house. So these are all conversations we can have from the beginning. And then what it does too is it makes your relationship with your buyer better, because now your buyer isn't, because inevitably what's going to happen is this seller, especially on a contingent sale, is going to be like, we can't move out. And either you or the listing agent or both of you weren't, thinking ahead enough to put this in the purchase agreement. So now you're going to try to negotiate it late in the escrow. And that causes issues for the buyer, depending on where they're coming from, when they're going to move to, where they're moving from, all of those things. So again, if I start to do this, have this conversation with my buyer from the beginning and be like, look, when this escrow closes for at least 2 weeks, you're not going to have access to the property. They're still going to be living there. So you need to make your living arrangements match that. Right? So be careful about giving notices at your apartment or any of those things when you're moving. Okay? And then you have to make sure that these are attached. Now, I don't want to go into a bunch of detail on the seller license to remain in possession and the RLAS, but just based on a couple conversations I've had recently, there's some things that I want you guys to pay attention to on these SIPs. And again, I'll do with seller in possession and those kind of things that'll be part of probably the contingent sales. We'll spend a lot of time on the SIP and the RLAS. But the SIP, the term here is the amount of days. So if we negotiated 14, that's 14. This amount right here is the amount that they're going to pay for those 14 days. We're going to let them be in those 14 days for free because, again, I want to make sure I have a stronger offer. Down here, we want to look at this, the delivery of possession fee. This is something that people don't pay attention to. They skip over. In addition to the license fee, we're not charging anything. Seller agrees to deposit with escrow holder, or such funds shall be withheld from seller's proceeds, a delivery of possession fee in the amount of, let's just say it's going to be $5,000. Okay? At close of escrow, this fee will be released to buyer or held in escrow. Make sure it's held in escrow. Within 5 days after delivery of possession of buyer shall return the delivery of possession fee to seller if the property is delivered to buyer in the conditions specified in paragraphs 3A and B. and on the date of paragraph 1. Now, here's the key to that. I don't get to keep it. I just hold it until they deliver it to me. I don't get to keep it. So what it is it's just like insurance. That's like, hey, I'm holding some of your money to make sure that you move out on time. Okay. And they have to maintain the property and keep it in good condition. So that's all I wanted to go over. Just make sure you're doing that, because that's going to help to maybe alleviate some of the fears that your buyer might have. Okay. So SIP, we'll dig into that in the contingent sales class when we do that. All right, so let's go back down here to that. Okay, so again, to recap with seller in possession, seller occupied, and those vacant units. If a seller is in there, at least at a minimum 3 days, speak to the listing agent, find out what they need. It may be more. If it is contingent, I would start with a minimum of 10, and then again have a conversation with the listing agent about what the next move is. That way you're prepping your buyers properly, and you're going to be writing an offer that makes sense. Okay? Any questions about the sellers in possession? Anybody? Okay. Occupied units by tenants or someone other than the seller, anyone other than the seller. So I've had a conversation a few times with agents where they're talking about, oh, the brother lives in one of the units, this person, but they're not owners, right? They have family members that live in the units that aren't paying rent or whatever the case is. Like a mother and father own two, a duplex. They live in one and their son lives in another, and they don't charge them anything, right? That son is still technically have to be treated as a tenant. You have to treat them as a tenant. And even in single family residences where you have adult children that aren't on title living with their parents and you're selling the property, you have to treat those people as if they're tenants, because we've seen far too many times where an adult son or daughter, somebody lives in the house with the parents sell the house, and then they go, I don't have anywhere to go, I'm not moving out. Right? And we're at close of escrow. And that's not a seller in possession anymore, because unless the sellers are going to remain there with this adult child that is not moving out, that's not a seller in possession. That's a tenant in possession. And once you close escrow with that person in there, if those sellers move out and you don't have something in place for them to be out, your buyer just inherited a tenant. Okay? So you have to treat them as tenants. They don't get the same rights as tenants where it's like, oh, no, you got to pay them cash for keys. I mean, you ultimately may have to. The sellers may have to pay their children to move out. But that needs to be addressed so those adult children are out of the property at the close of escrow. In this case right now, what we're going to do is just talk about actual tenants. Okay? So if there are tenants in the property, whether those tenants are going to be remaining in possession when we close escrow, or they're going to be vacated prior to close of escrow, you have to include a TOPA. No matter what, you have to include a TOPA with any tenant occupied property. So if you got a single family where somebody's renting out a room, TOPA. If you've got 3 units, TOPA. You have to have it. Include it with your offer. It's necessary. And let's take a look at the TOPA just quickly, okay? By default, tenants to remain in possession, okay? It's set up as all the tenants are remaining in possession with all the rights that they had before. If one or all of the units are going to be delivered vacant, then you would put you leave the property, or it's unit 1, right? 1 unit is going to be delivered vacant, okay? This is where you're going to establish the responsibility of the seller. So you could check off this box for delinquent rents. What I would suggest that you also ask for is the tenant estoppel certificates. Tenant estoppel certificates are just a form that's filled out by the tenant that just kind of verifies all the information that the landlord has given you. Not going to spend a lot of time on this, because we're talking about writing offers and spending time with offers, but just know this needs to be incorporated. Now, what I will tell you about tenant occupied properties is If you are writing offers on units with the intent of your buyer occupying them, and you are asking for units to be delivered vacant, in the state of California, it is very difficult, extremely difficult, to evict those tenants without cause. So generally what happens is it becomes a very expensive cash for keys situation that the owner of the property has to negotiate with those tenants to move them out. If your buyer wants to move into one of those units, they will legally have the right to evict those tenants in the units once they are the owner, because they want to live in it. And if they want to put their adult son or daughter, or they want to put their mom or dad in the other unit, they could evict the tenants from that one too legally, and they won't have to go through all the legal mess, because they have the right to do that. For the entire state of California, there's a relocation of 1 month's rent. Now, every city has their own, different cities have their own rent control laws or rent stabilization laws. We all know City of LA and theirs, how, they charge based on the income of the tenant, the age of the tenant, the health of the tenant, and how long they've been there, right? Unincorporated county of LA, right? The unincorporated cities that are part of LA County, they have a much harsher rent stabilization and rent control laws, and they even apply to single family residences. So you guys have to be extremely careful when you're dealing with a single family residence in somewhere that is an unincorporated part of LA County. And there's a lot of those places, right? There's some of it in Whittier. There's parts of, just outside of Compton that aren't incorporated as part of Compton. They're LA County. Those rent control laws are much, much stiffer. So you've got to be very careful about promising that you could get units vacant, promising that you could get single family houses vacant at close of escrow if there's a tenant involved. Be very careful. And I can tell you from experience with agents here, and we've had agents here that have had 6 and 9 month long escrows because the buyer and seller agreed that they were going to vacate those tenants, and they had a hard time getting them out. And those escrows took 6 months and 9 months. And we've had other times where deals fell apart and there were lawsuits because buyers sued sellers because they couldn't vacate tenants. So please, 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 if you have any questions about writing an offer where you're asking for tenants to be vacant or someone's telling you the tenants are going to be vacant, talk to me. Let's make sure that we're doing everything properly. Okay? So I have some questions here in the chat. So let's see. Kyle, if you're planning to speak about this, or I missed it, at what point should the buyer charge the seller per diem day 4, and what is the best calculation amount to charge? Thank you. Oh, okay, so what she's referencing in the chat is in the seller license remain in possession. And again, we'll talk about this way more in detail, is one of the things that I have you guys add in here is a per diem. So in this case, we gave them 14 days. So what I would do here is, for example, I would say, seller agrees to a per diem of, and what you could do is calculate the payment, right? You could prorate your payment. If your payment's $4,000, divide that by 30, whatever that is. In this case, let's just pick $150, right? I don't want to spend time doing math if I don't have to. $150 if seller remains in possession beyond day 14 after close of escrow. Okay? You could change the verbiage up a little bit. You could put, hey, from days 15 through 20, 150 days, 20. If it goes 20 to 29, it's this much money. You could make some adjustments to that. But it's basically here what we're doing is it's a holdover per diem. So if they don't move out, and really, to be honest with you, it's a benefit to the seller to have this per diem more than it's really a benefit to the buyer. What I mean by that is, if I'm the seller and God forbid I got to stay 16 days instead of 14, I know it's only going to cost me $300. If I didn't have this in place, if I didn't sign agreeing to this per diem and I had to stay 3 extra days, and the buyer could prove that their damages were in excess of $3,500 because I didn't move out, and they chose to sue me for those damages and they could prove them, I could have to pay $3,500, small claims court. So it's a protection for me. For the buyer, yes, you're giving up that if I can get damages, if I can prove damages, I can theoretically get that money. What it's doing, though, is saying you don't have to prove any damages. They're going to pay you $300 or $450. They've agreed to it without having to prove any damages. So it just makes it a little easier. That's all. So yeah, I would say what I would do is, based on the question that was in the chat, is if you're not sure how much to ask for, prorate your payment for your buyer, or just ask for a flat rate like 100, 150, 125. You don't have to be crazy. It's not about getting one over. It's just about saying, hey, listen, you're agreeing to pay us something, so we're just not sitting here on our hands while you're living in our house. Even if the unit they're residing is permitted legal, even if I'm not quite sure, Alba, what that's in reference to, what we were talking. What if you could go ahead and unmute yourself? Maybe you can clarify that question for me.
Hi, Kyle. I was referencing to the TOPA. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that we need to send a TOPA for all of the units that are occupied. So I was asking, even if the units that the tenants are residing in are not permitted, like for example, let's say it's a garage conversion.
Yeah, you still need to do it. And it's okay. It's just one TOPA. You don't have to do a TOPA for every unit. It's just one TOPA.
Okay, yes.
It's just one. But yes, even illegal units.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I guess that answers Veronica's questions also. And I got to thank you. All right. Moving on now. We're going to look at the seller delivery of documents. The seller has 7 days to deliver the documents to you. Now, if I'm writing the offer and I'm reducing all of my time periods, I mean, I'm hopefully not reducing my time periods crazy, but if, for example, we go back to our investigation contingency 3L3 right here, right? Investigation of property. That investigation of property is all my investigations. That's my professional home inspection. That's reviewing documents. That's looking at permits. That's hiring other inspectors to come in. All that happens in 3L3. Okay? So, if I have these days shortened, if I've shortened all these contingencies, right? And I leave the seller's delivery of documents at day 7. What happens is as long as they deliver them on time. So let's say I have 10-day inspection, right? My investigation, my inspection, my review of documents, all that stuff is 10 days. That's what I agreed to, or that's what I wrote in, thinking that it's going to make my offer look stronger because I shortened those time periods down. If I don't adjust this, then that means that as long as the sellers deliver everything to me, the prelim, the HOA docs if they exist, their disclosures, the solar disclosure, any of those things that they have to deliver, they deliver to me on day 7. They're on time, which means I'd have to review all of those documents, accept all of those documents, and remove my contingencies in 3 days. Just because their time periods weren't adjusted, but mine were, it doesn't change how the rules work for the seller to deliver. So there is no extension of your contingency unless the seller is late on their delivery. So if I'm the one that is saying to the seller, the listing agent, I am going to shorten all my contingencies, I should also request this to be shortened to give me more time to review. Okay? If I'm the listing agent and I'm countering it, I should do the same thing, because ultimately those things are going to delay our close anyway, and all it does is just cause chaos. So keep in mind, as long as everything the seller is required to return gets returned and those gets provided to the buyer in those 7 days, even if your contingency period is 8 days, they're on time. You have to remove. They could send you a notice to perform to remove your contingencies, even if you just got the disclosures the day before, because you shortened the time period, but you didn't shorten theirs. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, if they're late by a day, so I have a 10-day contingency period, right? And they give me all the disclosures on day 8, which is a day late for them, then I do get a 5-day period. I get 5 days from the delivery or my contingency removal date, whichever is greater. So it works that way too. If they're a little late when they're short, but you guys have to understand that these are conversations that you have to have. You don't just assume that it's happening, because listing agents will still send notices to perform. They'll still try to cancel. They'll still do things. So again, communication is going to be key on this. And if I haven't gotten seller documents and we're getting to that point where it's going to be late and it's going to change my contingency period, then I'm going to send either notices to perform or I'm going to send extensions of time. Whether the seller agrees to any of those things is neither here nor there. What I want is a paper trail that I did the right thing for my buyer, by requesting that the seller provide me the documents, by asking for more time for my buyer to review them, doing all that stuff. Whether the seller agrees to it and does it is another story. But I don't ever want my buyer to be able to say, well, what did you do to help me? I don't like that. So I'm going to do everything I can to make sure. So just understand that when we're talking about shortened time periods, does it make sense with your removal of contingencies and the things that you need to do in order to do that, and them delivering you disclosures and documents and reports and things like that? Okay. Sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions. 5 days. So you have 5 days from receipt of the escrow instructions to sign them and return them. I know that sometimes what happens is agents and their assistants and their transaction coordinators, because they don't want to schedule multiple appointments, they wait until they have disclosures. So sometimes they'll get escrow instructions, but they won't get the disclosures for a few more days, and then they make an appointment, and then a few days later everybody comes in and signs everything. The problem that presents is this: if I'm a listing agent and I'm on it, and I call escrow, and I know that I got the escrow instructions 5 days ago or more, so you must have received them, and I call escrow and say, hey, escrow, has the buyer returned the escrow instructions yet? And they say no, and I send you a notice to perform to do it, and you guys aren't in the position to do it, I could technically cancel for that. So keep in mind that this time period, this 5 days after delivery, is not just a like, oh, whatever, we'll ignore it, because it could ultimately lead to the seller having an ability to get out of your escrow very early, get out of your transaction very early. The thing that makes I think people have been lucky by not doing their escrow instructions in that 5 day period, just because nobody really pays attention to it. That includes listing agents. So the listing agents aren't using it as an ability to send a notice to perform. Okay? 5 days. Make sure you're doing it. Time to pay fees for ordering HOA documents. The problem with that is that's kind of out of the control of everybody except for escrow. Escrow has to order those. Escrow won't order those until there's money in escrow. So the sooner the deposit's in and cleared, the sooner those will get ordered. Most of the time, ordering them in 3 days and paying for them hasn't happened. Okay? Keep that in mind. Because that then, again, HOA documents, the delivery of those is the 7 day delivery, like everything else. If you're late on those, it extends out contingency periods potentially, and it could cause problems, right? I just talked to an agent, yesterday. They had the escrow moving very quickly. They've only been in escrow for, not even 2 weeks yet, I think. The lender called them and said, sent a message to the buyers and said, we have clear to close. So they were ready to close early. Problem is that once the underwriter reviewed it, it had, I guess the percentage of rentals was so high that they couldn't get it funded. And so they had to they can't fund the loan. They can't buy the property because there's nothing will finance it unless they get like hard money or some other special program, something like that. But those HOA docs were like 2 days late, right? So the buyers are upset. They want the sellers to pay for their inspection and their appraisal, and I had to kind of explain, like, well, that's kind of part of doing business. The seller didn't do anything malicious. They didn't know this was the case with this condo complex. They found out when you found out. So it's not like you can point at them and say, well, you did something wrong, so now you owe me. So I think it was just a difficult conversation for them to have. So my suggestion is, with stuff like this, with the escrow fees and things like that, and paying fees with your buyer, part of your buyer consultation needs to be, by the way, we're going to do professional home inspections and you're going to pay for those. And we're going to do appraisals and you're going to pay for those. And we might write an offer and get our offer accepted, and you might find after your appraisal and your inspection that you just don't like the condition of the property, or something else comes up that you decide you don't want the house. That money is not going to get refunded to you. I just think we don't have that conversation, because I think the reason we don't have that conversation as buyer's agents is because if we tell somebody, well, you're going to spend, $1,500 to buy a house, and you might not buy that house, and that $1,500 is gone. I think as buyer's agents, we get a little nervous to have that conversation with buyers, because we think they're going to run and hide. But I'd rather them run and hide from that $1,500 conversation before I'm showing them a house, as opposed to having them really upset with me that they spent $1,500 and now they're not getting the house because something is wrong with the property, not because they don't want it. So I don't know, just keep that in mind. And we'll talk about that again as we get back into our buyer consultations and things like that, and working with buyers. Seller to install smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing in the 7 days. The reason they added that is because now if there's a reinspection, the seller's on the hook for the reinspection. Right? So if my appraiser goes out and the seller hasn't installed the smoke alarms, done the water heater bracing, put the carbon monoxide detectors in, the appraiser goes out, calls those things and says, hey, this needs to be done, because we're pushing appraisals because we've shortened everything. Then what happens is the appraiser says, well, no, it'll appraise if these things get done. They have to go out and reinspect. If there is a reinspection fee, that's the seller's responsibility. So this is more for listing agents. You may want to have a conversation with your sellers to make sure this stuff gets done immediately. Don't wait for escrows. Do it as soon as you take the listing. Say, hey, by the way, let's make sure that the water heater's strapped, that the smoke detectors are installed, and the carbon monoxide detectors are installed, so that we don't have to worry about that when we open escrow. The evidence of representative authority, that's just if you have an entity, a corporation, a trust, a power of attorney, within 3 days, you have to provide proof that that person that's signing on behalf of that entity legally can sign on behalf of that entity. Okay, any questions? Any questions up to this point about time periods or anything like that? Raise your hand, type it in the chat. All right. Okay, so now we're into items included and excluded. So let's make sure that if there is a reference to something being included in the MLS or something being excluded in the MLS, that we make sure that our offer refers to that. Now, if there's nothing in there, like in the MLS listing in the remarks, it doesn't say, hey, refrigerator, stove, whatever is going to stay. If your buyer wants to request that, that's fine. Just understand that, we don't know for sure if those are the items that are going to be included. The thing that I think is crazy is people just start doing this stuff. They just check boxes off. I'm sure those of you guys that are listing agents have seen offers that come in like that. I think a lot of times when that happens, it was either like, sometimes it's the template thing we've talked about in the past. But just know for sure what it is that you're asking for. ask for only, if they're listing stuff, put it in there. If they're excluding items, put it in. Don't make it a point to where it has to be countered. But if you're a listing agent and you said, hey, by the way, the refrigerator and the washer and dryer are staying, generally they're staying because the seller doesn't want to move them. If you get an offer that doesn't have refrigerator, washers, and dryers checked off, then you need to counter it. Because if we get to the close of escrow and you guys leave that stuff in there because the seller didn't want it, we're going to have an issue about sellers leaving their personal items or rubbish or, trash in the house. Okay? So just make sure that we're clear. If it says it's going to be included, include it. If it says it's going to be excluded, exclude it. Okay? All right. Questions about any items included or excluded. Now, just know that things like security systems. So if you have security cameras, you're a seller, you have security cameras. Generally, those security cameras have to stay. I know that has a box here to check, but most of the time they have to stay. It depends on how they're connected. If they're just, I plug it in and it sits on a stand, it's not wired in, those aren't required to stay. That would be when we need to include it. But the video doorbells, that's why you see them separate. Those are battery powered. They're not wired. They're just attached to the wall. But if you have security systems that are wired through the house and those cameras are part of that security system, then that needs to stay. This is more referencing those wireless battery powered security systems like you see on, that you could order when you see those commercials on your social media or whatever. But if you've got one of those full on security systems where they have the wired windows, sensors and door sensors and motion sensors, and it's attached to the smoke detector and they have cameras that are wired into it, that stuff has to stay. Okay. So just be aware of what is and isn't going to stay, and maybe ask some questions too. If you're a buyer's agent, when you're showing the property before you write the offer, when you're having that conversation with the listing agent to make sure my offer is good, you noticed some stuff. Hey, by the way, I noticed that X, Y, and Z was in the property. Are that stuff going to stay, or are you guys taking it out? So at least I can have a conversation with my buyers before we write the offer. All right. Now we get to allocation of costs. The first one up is the natural hazard disclosure report. So this is a mandated disclosure. Well, it's actually a replacement to a mandated disclosure. The mandated disclosure is the natural hazard statement, which is filled out by hand by the seller. It's not a report from a third-party company, but this will replace that report and that disclosure, which is good because your sellers don't know anything about the natural hazard zones. They don't know about fire zones and things like that. So this, this is my opinion, because this is replacing a mandated disclosure from the seller, I would never be in a position as listing agent to make the buyer pay for it, because I would never want somebody to try to insinuate that I didn't provide a mandated disclosure. So have the seller pay for it. Okay. Click on here who it's provided by, pick your NHD company, whoever that might be, and put it in there. Okay? It's not going to weaken your offer by asking the seller to provide this report. Okay? Just do it. This is normal. Have it be the seller. One of the things that I see over and over and over and over again is this. When I'm reviewing offers for people. And when we talked about having clean offers, the thing that we talked about was not only just how they were written, but that they were, there weren't grammatical errors or silly things that are left like this. When they leave click here for additional report or click here to select wild, they're not picking anybody to provide a report, but they're leaving that click here for additional report. I don't know why, but when I see that on an offer, I think, man, you were just not paying attention. You're just running through. I would want my offer to look a little cleaner than that. Go ahead, Maribel.
So you did tell me that yesterday, Kyle, and when I delete it and then I save it, then I go back and it auto generates again. So that thing doesn't even delete.
So you put not
Oh,
applicable on there.
so
You
okay.
put not applicable and you deleted it. And then when you went out and came back, it was back to choose.
Okay. So not applicable on the next one because it doesn't say not applicable.
No, you just delete it.
Okay, and then I save it and then it kept popping up again. I don't know. I'll try it again. Thank you,
Yeah,
Kyle.
you're welcome. So anyway, this optional wildfire disclosure report is optional. It says it right there. It's optional wildfire disclosure report. So this is not the fire hardening that Brandon was talking about in our meeting. Brandon Zavrinsky from First American NHD. That's not this. This is a secondary report that's optional that supposedly narrows down the high fire danger areas and is supposed to help with insurability. No one has proved that that's true. I think the report's like $200 through First American. For any of the NHD, you have to order through the NHD companies, basically. It's not a requirement. Make sure it's off. Don't do it because, again, sometimes even us as listing agents, we are human and we make mistakes, right? So we get an offer and somebody put on here that they want the Fortress Fire wildfire disclosure, and they check seller and they said, oh, it's going to be First American NHD. They did all that. And we're in an area that is not a high fire zone area because the couple times it's happened, I think one was in Downey and one was in Norwalk. The listing agent missed this and did not counter it out. Guess what the seller had to pay for? Well, ultimately the listing agent paid for it, but they had to do this disclosure, this Fortress wildfire disclosure, even though they weren't in a high fire zone, because the listing agent didn't catch it and wasn't paying attention. Okay, so not applicable. Take this out. Take that out. Do not do this. Now, if you find out it's in a high fire zone and you guys want to request this, go ahead. But you're probably not going to know it's in a high fire. I mean, you have an idea that it's in a fire zone depending on where you buy, but you're not really going to know if it's in a high fire zone until you get your copy of your NHG report anyway. But I would leave this out for now. Okay. This section right here, Q3, A and B, are for any reports that you want to request the seller to pay for that aren't referenced here. Don't put in here home inspection and then check off buyer. Don't do that. The contractor already has that the buyer gets to do a home inspection. Don't put it. All it does is just make you look like you don't know what you're doing. Don't do that. Don't do that either. City presale report. Don't do that because that is referenced already right here in Q5. That is the presale inspection report. And Q6 is the work that needs to be done based on that report. That's what these two are for. So don't use it for that. What you could use it for, and again, I want to stress this. If you are not a VA buyer, stop asking the seller for termite reports. Okay? Stop it. There's no need for it. You could do your own termite inspection. There's no need for it. You could do your own request for repairs, all that stuff. But if you are VA because it's required, then I would ask for it because it's going to be required anyway. So what I would do here is would destroying pest report. And this is just the report. This is not about clearance. This is not about repairs. This is just the report. And I'm going to ask for the seller to pay for it. That's fine if it's VA. If you are getting any other kind of financing, please leave this out because once you put it in, then the lender is going to make it a requirement to get the clearance in order for you to fund the loan. Well, 99% of the time they're going to. Okay? But that's the kind of stuff that would go in here would be that. Now, if you're asking for the seller to do the repairs also, you would reference that down here. And then you would do it here. You could say, you don't have to do wood shrimp as you could say termite, it's fine. But that's where the repairs and clearance section goes for them to pay for it. This is solely the report. So make sure you understand that. Again, a clean offer. You really want a clean offer, unless your VA, leave the damn termite report out of this altogether. Okay? Smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, seller, not a problem to ask for that. Not a problem at all. Everybody knows that they are the ones who take care of that. Just ask for seller. It's not going to weaken your offer. This next section, like I just explained to you guys, is where we're talking about for city presale inspection reports is Q5, and city presale repairs is Q6. So, again, conversations with listing agents help. Virginia has a listing, and it's in Southgate. And I call Virginia and say, hey, Virginia, I'm getting ready to write an offer on your property. I wanted to find out, have you guys already gotten the Southgate pre-sale inspection report? And she says, yes, absolutely, we did. Okay, is your seller prepared to complete those repairs? No, if we get an offer, we're going to counter it back that the buyers are going to be responsible for the clearance, right? The repairs. If I know that that's what they're going to do, then I'm going to put here, the seller's going to provide the report. And guess what? I'm going to check off already. They don't have to counter me. The buyer's going to be responsible for that. Done. That makes my offer a lot cleaner. And what you guys need to start understanding as listing agents, you cannot waive these city pre-sale inspection reports. It's not allowed. You have to provide them. All of them will allow for the buyer to take on the responsibility of the clearance after the close of escrow. And that's what you need to make sure you put in all your MLS listings. Hey, we will provide the city pre-sale report, but you will be responsible for the clearance. That's it. That's the right way to do it. Not it's waived. We're not doing it. Absolutely not. You cannot do that. No city allows you to waive it. Please don't. Well, Gardena will. You could pay them money and they'll waive the report. But nobody else does. So please stop trying to get this stuff waived. Doesn't work. Okay, so let's see. We got in the chat. What if the property is determined to be in a high fire? If we do not ask for this report, how can we hold the seller to follow through with clearing that report that we were talking about is not the report that does that. That's the fire hardening, and that one they are required to provide. Okay? So that's two different things. The fire hardening disclosure and that are two different things. This one that we talked about, this fortress is not the same as the fire hardening. So they're two different things. Okay? All right. So we've got that taken care of, right? Escrow fees. Not buyer, not seller, not both. Each to pay their own. And escrow holder, unless you've asked already who the escrow company is going to be seller's choice. Because if I write seller's choice on there, the seller doesn't have to counter it. The listing agent doesn't have to counter it. That's a weird pet peeve I have is when I see an offer that says seller's choice and then the listing agent still counters, Pacific Escrow, so-and-so escrow, and the escrow officer's name. Not necessary. Same thing with the title insurance. They put their names in. Not necessary. You don't need to do that. If it says seller's choice, like we're going to put here, seller's going to pay for it and it's going to be seller's choice. I don't have to counter this as listing agent. So what I'm doing by doing seller's choice, if I'm doing that as a buyer's agent, then I'm giving you what you want basically, and we don't need to memorialize it in a counter offer. You just go do what you need to do once you accept my offer. So the thing is, like, listing agents already hate writing counters. I mean, some of the counters I see that they don't counter stuff that's necessary, but they counter stuff that's not necessary, like that. So be more efficient with your countering. And with us writing offers, we could do it this way. seller's choice. You don't need to counter me. It's your choice. Do whatever you want. Now, if you talk to the listing agent, I call Virginia. Virginia goes, oh, yes, I want to use specific escrow. My title is going to be, I don't know, Tycor, whatever. Then that's what you're going to put. You could do that if they tell you. But if they don't tell you, seller's choice is perfectly fine. And the seller doesn't have to counter it. I could do, technically with the NHD, I should be doing the same thing because they're paying for it. Right? Technically, I should be doing the same thing. Seller's choice. Let them pick. I don't care. All the NHD companies are good. I don't care which one they want. Now, if you want to try to work for yours, go for it. But seller's choice. If there's there's nothing for you to do. And I think what happens when people put both is they think about this insurance policy, but that's a totally different thing. Okay. This buyer lender's policy is to make sure that there's no liens or anything on the buyer that would affect the lender's position because they decided to give them a loan. This title insurance is to show, hey, by the way, we've cleared all their title. We're transferring you clear title. And if something comes up that gets in the way, the title insurance will take care of it. Okay. Because they missed it. So seller's choice and you're good to go. County transfer tax and fees. Norm is the seller for city, county transfer tax, city transfer tax. The norm is the seller. If you wanted to try to improve your position on your offer and your buyer has the cash to do it, you could choose to pay those transfer fees. That's again up to you. But, depending on where you're purchasing, it could get expensive, right? The county's $1.10 per thousand. City of LA is like $4.50 or $4.40, something like that per thousand. So it could get expensive when you're looking at what the cost is. But the norm is that the seller pays it, and that usually doesn't have an effect on whether they're going to choose your offer over somebody else's. But it could, if my buyer had the cash and said, I'm going to take care of those transfer fees, it could move you ahead of somebody that you were, a very similar offer. So that could always be a strategy. Instead of shortening some time periods, you could say, I'll pay for this because I have the money to do it. Okay. HOA fee for prepping disclosures, the seller's responsibility. There's no changing that. The certification fee, if there is, the buyer's responsibility. The transfer fees normally is the seller, and nobody really ever counters that, but you could, again, buyer, seller could pay for it, but the norm is the seller. Private transfer fees, by default, it's the seller, or if you check, it could be both. We could split it, or the buyer could do it. And a private transfer fee is generally only seen on new construction, and it's the first time it gets sold again. The builders, the developers put that into the contract to somebody buying new construction that they get. Excuse me. Excuse me. I know what happened. I choked. That they get a little payment when you sell your property. So you're not going to see that on, the majority of the houses that we sell that are not new construction. Okay, so the fees and costs, we talked about that already. Like, this is for any other fee that may not go here, but like repair work or something like that. For home warranty, it is not uncommon for the seller to pay for the home warranty. Just get the right amount for whatever coverages you're going to ask for. Sometimes I see people put some, really high numbers in here. They're like $800, and they pick their home warranty company, right? They pick First American. Now here, make sure that if you're asking for your company that you put your rep, because you're not using your escrow. So if I just put First American here, they're going to use their rep when escrow orders does all the stuff, right? So make sure you just put your rep's name in here. $800 is not a basic home warranty, and that's all we're choosing right here. If that $800 is because we want coverages, we have to check those coverages. We have to write them in over here. So whatever that 800 is covering that you're asking for, roof or AC or whatever it is, make sure it goes in here to the coverages section on the side. Because if not, all you're asking for is a basic home warranty. And then what it looks like is I'm asking for too much money. If you just want a basic home warranty, then make sure what the cost of the basic home warranty is. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but put that amount in there. But make sure it's clear why you're asking for the amount you're asking for. Okay. Other terms, this could be, I don't know, subject to interior inspection. It could be, you could reference, now there's the RAD form, which would be like I'm writing the offer and I'm related to the buyer, or I'm representing myself, I'm the buyer, right? We could put that general, we used to put that in here, right? So if I'm related to the buyer, or I am the buyer, or my entity is the buyer and I'm representing myself, we would put that in here. Now they have the RAD form to do that, so technically you don't have to. But if there's any other terms that really don't have a space, you could put them in this section. Probably what you're going to see more often than not is things like, subject to interior inspection, or maybe a reference to something that's supposed to be installed prior to close of escrow. There was a reference to something in the MLS. It says, oh, we're going to install new closet doors or whatever. When a seller agrees to install new closet, whatever it is, anything that doesn't have a space here, that's where you would go to other terms. Okay, so I know it's 12, but there's not enough here for another class. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to kind of run through these things quickly because there's not really much else for us to cover. So any of the addendums or amendments that we need, advisories, addenda, anything, they would check off here. So if this was a probate purchase, we would check that. If it was a manufactured home, we would check that. So make sure that these boxes are checked for any of these things that you're going to, so that you have the proper documentation, so your package is put together when you submit your offer, right? Make sure those are all checked off properly. Now, these are all the descriptive paragraphs that go back to paragraph 3. So when we're looking at paragraph 3 and you see this second column of paragraphs, this is just the detailed description of what happened in this negotiation paragraph. So we could skip that because we're talking about writing offers. So I just want to jump to, sorry guys, hope I'm not making you dizzy. But we're going to get down here to, and then again, clean offers, make sure the dates are in, make sure everything's initialed when you send it. Liquidated damages, quickly. Liquidated damages is what protects individual buyers, like regular buyers, not corporations, not entities. On a 1 to 4 unit purchase, it protects their deposit up to a maximum of 3%. And what it does say is that if I breach the contract, I'm willing to give up my deposit for breaching the contract if I acted in bad faith. So, for example, I write an offer, my deposit, the purchase price is $600,000, right? So 3% of that is $18,000. My deposit is $20,000, or let's say it's $18,000, or no, let's say it's 20, right? We went big. So $20,000 deposit. I do something to breach the contract. I've removed all my contingencies. Do that. The seller would then have a right to only get the 18, not the whole 20. So they'd have to return at least $2,000 to me. Okay. But it's limited to the amount of your deposit. So if my deposit is only $10,000, even if 3% of the purchase price would be 18, they can't go after me for 3%. They could just go after my deposit, which is the 10. So that's basically what they're saying is the way it works is I'm saying to the seller, yes, I'm willing to give you my deposit, but I'm protecting myself so that if my deposit is big, I'm only liable to lose 3% of the purchase price. Now, if this is an investor, like a corporation, or it's an entity of some sort, that doesn't work that way. That doesn't work that way. They don't get that 3% protection. Okay. So liquidated damages generally is a thing that is going to make your offer stronger because the seller is going to require it. Now, this section down here, the arbitration of disputes, this could go either way. I'll get to you in just a second. This could go either way. the thing is that when we initial this arbitration of disputes, what it does is it causes us to not be able to go to litigation. We still have to file a lawsuit, but we go through mediation and arbitration instead of going through mediation and litigation. This is a personal preference thing. If your buyer doesn't want to initial this, but the seller does, then either the seller has to counter you and say you have to initial it, or they can't accept your offer if you refuse to. It can't be one says yes and one says no. Both parties either have to initial or both parties don't initial. And then we go through the process of dispute resolution, however we've agreed to it. There is not a huge benefit one way or the other. It is slightly cheaper, slightly quicker than a lawsuit. That's it. You still have to hire attorneys. You still have all kinds of things you have to do. It's not in our place to say, oh, do this instead. It's all it is it's an alternative to litigation, and it may be cheaper and it may be faster than litigation would, but there's no guarantee that that's the truth either. What would you like to do, right? Like, it's up to them. And then if the seller counters you and says, oh, we want this initialed, if you want the property, then you got to initial it, and that's where we're going to go. Okay. All right. Quickly, go ahead, Alba.
Kyle, just to clarify, the liquidated damages, 3%. That would be the EMD, right?
Yeah. It's capped at 3%. So it's either your
initial.
It's your EMD or 3%, whichever is less. Right. So if my EMD is $10,000, that's what they're taking. If my EMD is $50,000 and 3% of the purchase price is only $25,000, then they only have a right to 25. They have to return the other 25.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So we got that. We got the arbitration. The last thing that I want to make sure that you guys have is if they are entity buyers, please fill this out properly with the entity buyers, what the name of the entity is here, who the authorized signers are here, and make sure it's correct. It's just like things like when you do digital signatures with entity buyers, please make sure you do it properly when you set up your digital signatures, that you have a signing representative, because it looks like you look like a rookie when, let's say that the entity is, the Smith Trust, and that's what the signature says, the Smith Trust on here, right? Like, that looks like that's Bush League stuff, man. So please make sure that you're setting up your digital signatures to have the signing representative's name there as the signature, not the entity's name. But fill this out properly, because this is another thing that listing agents are going to look at. Okay, so make sure that stuff is all filled out properly. And that's it. You guys wrote an offer. We did an offer, and hopefully we did an offer that is going to give us a leg up and be able to get our offer accepted over the competition. Quickly in the chat, Virginia said, can you review solar again? In what aspect, Virginia? I'm not quite sure. I want to make sure I get it for you before we go. Let's see, Virginia. I got to find Virginia because I got to unmute her. She didn't put her hand up. There we go. Go ahead, Virginia.
You are so funny. Mr. Kyle, so on the contract, we just write it in as included, right? And then we have to add the document, right? That's included for the solar.
Yeah, the solar is the disclosure. But if we go to, real quick, I'm going to go back to paragraph
because
8.
Sometimes my clients are going to pay for it, right? Or take on the lease, let's say it that way. And other times the seller's going to pay it off. So do we put it in this,
so if
in
you
the
look,
other items?
It's not, you don't have to put it in the other items, but what's here is this section. If you look at paragraph 8H right here, it says buyer review of leased or lien items contingency. It's if applicable, because it may not apply. So there's already a built-in, if you go to 3L8. So just so we could look at it, and I probably should have said this review of leased or liened items, that's the solar. That's anything
Okay.
that's a lease or lien. It's already there. There's a 17-day period for it, but
gotcha.
if you shorten it, it's there. So you as listing agent have to provide that solar documentation, but it's in here already as its own contingency, kind of under this whole investigation pack.
Okay, so I don't have to write it anywhere else.
No, you don't have to write
Okay.
it anywhere else. It's there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But
Okay.
again, if the seller is paying it, I don't need to write that in there?
Oh no! If the seller's going to pay it off, then yeah. I mean, okay. First off, if I'm writing the offer and the listing agent already told me, "Hey, seller's going to pay off the solar," you guys don't have to assume anything. Then I'm going to put it, and I would probably put it here where we talked about. There's no space for it. I mean, I could put it in here, but
To be included, maybe?
I want to be clear, and so I'd probably put on this other terms. Seller has
Okay.
agreed to pay off any lease or liens
Okay, that's the right
related
thing.
to solar. Yeah, but be here.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry. I wasn't even showing my screen anymore. I was talking about other terms. I'm looking at myself thinking I'm writing stuff over here. You guys aren't even seeing it. I apologize. But yeah, that other terms section that we talked about, the paragraph 3R, that's where I would put it. Okay. Well, I'm sorry we went a little bit long. Anybody else have any other questions before I let you guys go? No? Okay. No. Great. So thank you guys. We're done. I don't know what's going to be next. So I'll let you know, obviously, before next Thursday, what's going to be coming next. If you missed any part of this, you need to go back and review, look at the previous portions, like the previous parts. I think we had 2 other classes on it. Those are all on YouTube. This will be on YouTube later today. Thank you guys for spending time with me. If you can, when you're on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, like the videos, share the videos, comment on the videos. I'd really appreciate the help to get those videos out there for as many people as possible to see them. Otherwise, thanks a lot, guys. Have a productive day and happy Valentine's Day to all of you. Have a good one.